The afternoon started like any other in the quiet little neighborhood where the couple had lived for a few years. It was the kind of place where people waved at each other from their driveways and spent mornings watering plants or sweeping porches. Nothing dramatic ever happened there. It was a peaceful spot, and that peace was one of the reasons the couple had chosen it. They liked the slow pace, the open streets, and the easy way the days passed by. But on this particular day, something felt slightly off. Even before anything unusual happened, the spouse who had been home alone that day was outside in the yard, tending to a few potted plants. They had always enjoyed taking care of those plants, especially on days when the weather was warm and the air felt soft. It was a nice way to pass the time while waiting for their partner, who was returning from time away with the Navy. They were looking forward to the evening, imagining the small dinner they would prepare and the stories they would hear. But just as they set a watering can down, something caught their attention. Two men were walking up the street toward the house. They wore uniforms, but they didn't look like the ones the local police usually wore. The fabrics seemed too thin, the colors slightly faded, like something bought online rather than issued by any real authority. Each man had a badge pinned to the front of his shirt, but even from a distance, the badges looked cheap, almost like children's costume accessories. The spouse didn't think much of it at first. They assumed maybe the HOA had hired some new security team or some temporary workers to check neighborhood issues. But as the two men got closer, their behavior seemed strange. Instead of walking casually or greeting neighbors, they marched straight toward the couple's house, talking quietly to each other. They didn't look around, didn't nod at the neighbor across the street who was pulling weeds from his garden. They kept their eyes fixed on the house as if they had already decided their destination. The spouse stood up slowly, unsure whether to greet them or simply step back and wait for them to speak. The two men reached the gate and looked inside without saying a word. One of them cleared his throat dramatically, like he wanted to be intimidating but wasn't quite sure how to do it. "You, the homeowner?" he asked, even though the spouse was standing right there on the porch. Clearly the one taking care of the house. The spouse nodded politely. "Yes, this is our home." The man held up a piece of paper, though he didn't actually offer it for inspection. He just waved it briefly in the air as if that alone proved something. "We're with the HOA enforcement unit," he said in a tone that was meant to sound official. "We need to check the backyard for a violation." The spouse blinked. They had never heard of an HOA enforcement unit. The HOA usually sent emails or friendly letters about rules, things like trimming hedges or moving trash bins. No one had ever shown up in a uniform. They also never acted like police. "What violation?" the spouse asked calmly. The second man stepped forward. "An unauthorized structure was reported on your property," he said flatly. "We need to inspect it." The spouse frowned. There were no new structures. Nothing had changed in the yard. And even if something had changed, the HOA certainly wouldn't send to serious-looking men with badges. "Could I see some identification?" the spouse asked. The first man held up his badge again. "This is our identification." The spouse stepped a little closer. The badge, now visible up close, was definitely not real. It had no seal, no number, and no lamination. It looked like it had been printed at home. The paper the man waved had several spelling errors. The HOA's name was even written incorrectly. "I'm sorry," the spouse said gently, trying not to sound confrontational. "But I don't recognize this. I've lived here for years and the HOA doesn't send officers like this. I'll need to call them to confirm before I let you into the backyard." The two men exchanged a quick look, and the spouse noticed how uncomfortable they suddenly seemed. The second man shifted his weight, scratching the back of his neck. The first man clenched his jaw, clearly irritated. "There's no need to call anyone," the first man said, trying to sound commanding. "We're telling you what needs to be done. Let us into the backyard." But the spouse stayed calm, even though they felt something was definitely wrong. "I'll call just to make sure. It'll only take a minute," they said softly. The first man sighed in a way that sounded rehearsed rather than natural. "People can't just refuse us access. We enforce HOA rules. If there's a violation, we have authority to address it." Authority? That word made the spouse even more certain that something wasn't right. Real HOA notices never use terms like that. They were always phrased kindly, encouraging cooperation rather than demanding it. The spouse reached into their pocket and pulled out their phone. The moment the men saw the phone, their posture changed. The second man stepped forward again, lowering his voice. "Look, let's keep this simple. Just open the gate. It'll take 2 minutes." The spouse shook their head. "I'm calling the HOA office right now." The neighbor who had been outside earlier was now standing near his driveway, watching the situation more closely. Even from a distance, it was clear he sensed something odd too. He pulled out his own phone cautiously, holding it as if ready to record. The spouse dialed the HOA number. It rang only once before a friendly voice answered. "Hello, community office? How can I help?" "Yes," the spouse said, stepping a little away from the two men. "I have 2 people here claiming to be HOA enforcement officers. They want to enter my backyard for an inspection. Can you confirm whether anyone was sent to my home today?" There was a pause on the other end. "We don't have enforcement officers," the HOA representative replied. "We don't send anyone in uniform. And we don't conduct unannounced inspections. Who exactly is at your home?" The spouse's heart beat a little faster. They glanced at the 2 men who were now standing stiffly, clearly listening. "They're wearing uniforms that look unofficial," the spouse said carefully. "And they're insisting they need to check for a violation." The HOA representative's voice grew firm. "Please do not allow them into your home or yard. Those people are not with us. We haven't sent anyone today. This is not a legitimate visit." The spouse swallowed, even though they had already guessed the truth before making the call. "Thank you," they said and quickly hung up. The 2 men were waiting, silent but obviously anxious. The first man finally opened his mouth. "Let us in." "That call doesn't change anything. It actually changes everything," the spouse replied calmly. "The HOA said you aren't from them. I'm asking you to leave." The second man took a step closer, frustration showing on his face. "You're making this difficult," he said. "Just let us do our job. You're not with the HOA," the spouse said softly, still refusing to raise their voice. The men exchanged another quick look. Their patience was clearly running out. The first man exhaled sharply. "Look, we're not leaving until we check the backyard. You can step aside, or we can handle it another way." That threat was enough to make the spouse's stomach tighten, though they kept their voice stable. "I'm going inside now," the spouse said. "If you don't leave, I'll call the police." The first man muttered something under his breath. The second one took another small step forward, but the spouse moved back toward the door. Their hands were trembling slightly, not out of fear exactly, but from the tension that had filled the moment. As the spouse stepped onto the porch, the neighbor across the street lifted his phone higher, clearly recording now. "Hey!" One of the men snapped at the neighbor. "Stop recording." But the neighbor didn't stop. The spouse reached the door and placed a hand on the knob. Their heart was racing now, louder than before. They could feel the shift in the air, the situation moving from strange to unsafe. The door felt like the only barrier between safety and uncertainty. "You're making a mistake," the first man said loudly, frustration slipping into his voice. The spouse didn't answer. They opened the door halfway and stepped inside, still watching the 2 men. "Don't," the second man said suddenly, taking 2 steps forward. The spouse quickly shut the door, turning the lock. The men immediately banged on it from outside, but the spouse stayed calm, breathing deeply, trying to keep themselves from shaking. Inside the quiet house, their mind raced. They didn't know who the men were, but they knew for certain they were not from the HOA. Their behavior, their fake uniforms, the way they insisted on entering without permission, none of it made sense unless they had some other reason for being there. The spouse stepped back, grabbed their phone again, and prepared to call the police at the same time. They remembered something that filled them with relief. Their partner was on the way home. They had spoken earlier on the phone. The spouse didn't know exactly what time they would arrive, but it couldn't be long now. For the first time since the men had appeared, the spouse allowed themselves a deeper breath. They weren't alone. Help was close. And even though the 2 men outside didn't know it, the house they were trying to pressure their way into belonged to someone who wasn't just another homeowner. It belonged to someone trained, disciplined, incapable of protecting the people they loved. The men kept pounding on the door for several more seconds, but the spouse no longer felt the same helplessness. Their hands steadied as they dialed the police. Their voice stayed calm as they explained the situation. And just as they were finishing the call, they heard a familiar sound outside, the sound of footsteps approaching. Confident and steady, their partner was home. What the fake officers didn't know was that everything was about to change. The sound of footsteps outside the door made the spouse pause for a moment. They knew that steady rhythm better than anything. It was the walk of someone who moved with calm confidence, someone who didn't rush unless they needed to, someone who always seemed prepared even without trying. It was the walk of the person they had been waiting for all day, before the spouse could move closer to the window. The banging on the door stopped. The two fake officers must have heard the footsteps too. The house suddenly felt quiet, except for the low murmur of voices outside, the kind that were too tense to be friendly. The spouse stayed just behind the door, listening closely. They didn't want to open it not with those two men still standing there. But they also knew their partner would figure out what was going on within seconds. They always did. That was simply the kind of person they were. Outside, the first fake officer spoke in a loud, unsure voice. "Can we help you?" he asked, though the tone suggested he was trying to reclaim whatever authority he thought he had. A calm voice answered, "I live here." The spouse felt a wave of relief wash over them. It was like their body loosened all at once, as though the steady presence of their partner outside gave the house itself a sense of protection. "We're conducting an HOA inspection," the second man said quickly. "We need access to the backyard." There was a long pause. The spouse imagined their partner standing there, taking in the uniforms, the cheap badges, the tense posture of the two men. They knew their partner didn't rush to assumptions, but when something felt off, they sensed it immediately. It was part instinct, part training, and part experience, an ability that had saved people more than once. "Is that so?" their partner finally said. "Who sent you?" The first man seemed taken aback by the question. "It's an HOA matter. You don't need to question us." Their partner let out a small breath. One of those breaths that carried a lot more meaning than sound. It wasn't frustration. It was the kind of breath that said, "I already know what's going on here." "I'll ask again," their partner said firmly, but without raising their voice. "Who sent you?" "We already said," the second man snapped. "Back up and let us do our job." Spouse could picture the moment perfectly, even without seeing anything. Their partner didn't argue, didn't posture, didn't try to intimidate. They had never been the kind of person who used their background to scare others. Their strength wasn't loud. It wasn't showy. It was steady and quiet, and it made people uneasy without understanding why. "What's your name?" their partner asked. "You don't need my name," the man grumbled. "Just open the gate to the backyard." Their partner didn't move. The spouse could hear the silent stretch. "Outside, the HOA doesn't have enforcement." "Officers," their partner said finally. Both men stiffened. "You don't know what you're talking about," the first one said. "I know enough," their partner replied. "And you need to explain why you're at my home." The second man stepped closer, and the spouse heard the gravel shift under his shoes. "Look, just step aside," he said sharply. "We're checking for violations." "Don't interfere." "Interfere with what?" their partner asked, sounding almost genuinely curious. The first man exhaled loudly. "We already told the homeowner we need to inspect the yard." "Oh, I know," their partner said. "They told me you weren't from the HOA." Spouse held their breath behind the door. Their partner had such a calm voice that people often mistook it for softness. But anyone who paid attention would notice the stillness behind it, the focus, the quiet readiness. The two fake officers didn't notice. They heard the tone, but didn't understand the weight it carried. The second man stepped even closer. "Are you going to move or not?" "No," their partner said simply. The spouse didn't need to see the men's faces to know they were frustrated. Their whole attitude since arriving had been built on the hope that the homeowners would panic or be confused enough to obey without question. They weren't expecting resistance. They definitely weren't expecting calm resistance. "You can't stop us," the first man muttered. "We have the right to inspect any suspected violation. It's part of our job. Your job?" Their partner repeated softly, as if they were trying to understand the word. "Who hired you?" "That's none of your business. It is when you're on my property and demanding access to my home." The men looked around, probably to see if any neighbors were watching. The spouse remembered the neighbor across the street earlier who had been recording. They hoped he was still there, because witnesses could make a huge difference in moments like these. People with bad intentions didn't like cameras. They didn't like attention. The spouse finally moved slightly toward the window beside the door and peeked out just enough to see what was happening. Their partner stood with relaxed shoulders but alert eyes. They didn't look angry or tense, just steady, the kind of steady that could ground an entire room. The fake officers, on the other hand, seemed agitated. Their movements were jerky, uncertain, like people who were running out of options. "You need to leave," their partner said in a quiet voice. "We're not leaving without checking the backyard," the second man said. "If you try to stop us, that's obstruction." The spouse saw the slight shift in their partner's expression, not anger but realization. They knew exactly what these men were trying to do, and they knew what needed to be done next. "This is private property," their partner said. "You were told no. That means you leave. We're not going anywhere," the first man said. "Move aside." Without warning, the first man stepped toward their partner and put a hand on his shoulder, trying to push him aside. It wasn't a hard shove, more like an attempt to show dominance or urgency. But it was enough for their partner's posture to change completely. The spouse held their breath again. Their partner didn't react angrily. They didn't flinch or step back. They simply moved the man's hand aside with a controlled, practiced motion, firm but not aggressive. "Don't touch me," their partner said softly. The second man scoffed. "You think you can scare us?" Their partner didn't answer. They didn't need to. Silence, when used by someone who understood it, was more unsettling than yelling ever could be. The second man stepped closer and jabbed, a finger toward their partner's chest. "We're doing our job. Stop interfering." "You don't have a job here," their partner replied. "And you're leaving." The spouse saw the second man's face twist in annoyance, maybe even embarrassment. He wasn't used to people pushing back. He definitely wasn't used to people standing calmly in front of him, as if he posed no threat at all. "You don't get to tell us what to do," the man snapped. "Now move." This time he shoved their partner with enough force to make the spouse's stomach flip. Not because their partner would be hurt. Nothing about the shove seemed capable of that, but because they knew what it meant. It meant the situation had crossed a line. Their partner straightened without even stepping back. It was as if the shove didn't register physically at all, only as information. And that information was enough. "You just assaulted me," their partner said in a still, level voice. "It's not assault," the man said quickly. "It's enforcement. That's not how enforcement works. That's how we do it." Their partner took one small step forward, not aggressive, not intimidating, just enough to reclaim the space that the man had tried to push them out of. "I'm asking you one last time," the partner said. "Leave my property." The men glanced at each other, and for the first time, the spouse saw something flicker across their faces. Uncertainty. It wasn't fear yet, but it was close. They had expected someone who would panic, someone who didn't know how to handle pressure. But instead, they had walked straight into someone whose calmness made everything around them feel smaller. The second man widened his stance slightly. "What are you going to do if we don't?" Their partner didn't answer right away. They didn't raise their voice. They didn't square their shoulders or try to look bigger. Instead, they spoke in the same calm tone they had used since the beginning. "You're going to leave," they said, "because you know you're not supposed to be here. And because you know if you stay, you'll make this worse for yourselves." The first man scoffed loudly. "Are you threatening us?" "No," their partner said. "I'm telling you the truth." The spouse could feel the tension rising outside like heat off pavement. Their partner wasn't exaggerating. They weren't bluffing. They weren't even trying to appear strong. They were simply stating facts, and those facts had weight. The second man stepped forward again, Too close this time. Get out of the way, he demanded. Their partner didn't move. Move. The man shouted this time. No. It happened quickly, but not suddenly. The second man reached out aggressively, maybe to push again or grab their partner's arm. Whatever he intended, he never finished the movement. Their partner intercepted his wrist not violently.
Not dramatically.
Just decisively, and held it in place. The second man tried to pull his arm back, but he couldn't. Their partner released him before the situation could escalate further. Don't touch me again, their partner said quietly. The first man stepped forward in anger, but the second grabbed his arm, shaking his head slightly. For the first time, the spouse saw fear beginning to show, not panic. But the kind of fear people feel when they suddenly realize they aren't in control. Let's just check the backyard, the first man muttered. No, their partner said. You're leaving now? The second man looked around again, maybe searching for a way out of the situation. An excuse, a path, anything. His eyes darted between the house, the street, and the neighbor who was still filming from a distance. The neighbor wasn't hiding. He stood openly, holding his phone up. The fake officers couldn't pretend he wasn't there. We should go, the second man whispered. The first man looked confused. We can't leave. We should go, the second man repeated, louder this time. Their partner didn't push them, didn't move toward them, didn't threaten them in any way. They simply stood where they were, calm and steady, the way only someone with years of training could. The two men backed away slowly, muttering to each other. Their badges bounced awkwardly on their shirts. Their fake authority dissolved the moment they realized they couldn't intimidate the people they intended to scare. And as they turned to walk down the driveway, their steps no longer had that forced confidence. They sounded like men who wanted to leave before things got worse. The spouse watched from behind the window as their partner finally exhaled and stepped back from the door. Their shoulders loosened a little, but the alertness in their eyes remained. The spouse opened the door finally, stepping outside. Are you okay? Their partner asked immediately. The spouse nodded, though their voice came out a little shaky. I'm okay now. Their partner reached out gently, checking their shoulder, checking their expression, checking the tremble in their hands. They didn't say much. They didn't need to. Their presence said enough. What happened? Their partner asked softly. The spouse explained everything, how the men showed up, the fake badges, the strange paper, the insistence on entering the yard, the call to the HOA, the way the situation escalated the moment they refused. Their partner listened carefully, jaw tightening slightly at a few moments, especially the part where one of the men shoved the spouse earlier. But they didn't interrupt. When the spouse finished, their partner placed a steady hand on their back. You did everything right, they said. The spouse exhaled shakily. They're not going to come back, are they? No, their partner said. Not after today. The police would arrive soon. The neighbor's recording would help. The situation wasn't over yet. The worst part had already passed. The spouse stood close to their partner, feeling safer than they had all afternoon. There was still confusion, still tension. But there was also certainty now. Certainty that the truth would come out. That they hadn't done anything wrong, and that they weren't alone in facing whatever came next. And outside, down the street, the two fake officers walked away quickly. Unaware that this was only the beginning of the trouble they were about to face, the street was quiet again after the two fake officers hurried away. But the calm didn't feel like real calm. It felt more like the moment right after a storm too, still too sharp, too aware. The spouse stood beside their partner on the porch, holding their arms close to their body, still shaken from everything that had happened. Their partner stayed close without crowding, watching the end of the street where the men had disappeared. Even though the house looked the same, something in the air felt different. It was the kind of feeling that told a person the situation wasn't finished yet. Not really. Their partner took a slow breath and turned to the spouse. Let's go inside, they said softly. The spouse nodded and followed them in. Once the door closed, the house felt warmer, safer, but their breathing was still uneven. Their partner noticed immediately and lightly touched their shoulder. Careful and gentle. You're okay, they said quietly. You're safe. I know, the spouse whispered, though the fear still sat heavily in their chest. Their partner didn't push them to talk. Instead, they guided them to the couch, sat beside them, and waited. They had always been good at waiting, never rushing someone, never forcing a conversation. It was one of the things that made the spouse feel secure around them. A few minutes passed before the spouse spoke again. They really tried to force their way in, they said, their voice soft, almost disbelieving. Why would they do that? Their partner kept their eyes on the spouse, listening fully. Because they wanted something, they said. Something in the backyard, maybe. Something they thought they could get by pretending to be in charge. But why pretend to be HOA officers? The spouse said. Of all things, why that? Because HOA rules scare people, their partner said. Some communities have seen people panic when someone in uniform shows up. They figured it would work here too. The spouse shook their head slowly. It almost did. No, their partner said. You questioned them. You called the real HOA. You didn't open the gate. You were strong. Don't forget that. The spouse didn't respond to that right away. Part of them understood their partner's words. But another part was still stuck in the moment when the man tried to shove his way inside. It was hard to let go of the fear that came with suddenly being face to face with people with bad intentions. It made the world feel smaller, less predictable. Their partner gently rested a hand on the spouse's back and rubbed slow circles, giving comfort without drawing attention to it. You did everything right, they repeated quietly. A soft knock at the front door made the spouse flinch. Their partner stood instantly, not with panic, but with controlled alertness. It was amazing how quickly they could shift from comfort to readiness. Like a switch inside them knew exactly when to turn. It's okay, their partner said, placing a calming hand on the spouse's shoulder before walking to the door. They looked through the peephole. It's the neighbor, said the spouse, let out a breath. Their partner opened the door slightly, keeping their posture relaxed but watchful. The neighbor from across the street stood there, holding his phone awkwardly. Hey, he said with concern in his voice. I recorded the whole thing. You need the video, right? Their partner nodded. Yes. Thank you. The neighbor stepped forward a bit. Are you both okay? He asked the spouse. We're all right, the spouse said, though their voice was still fragile. You handled that better than I would have, the neighbor said honestly. Those guys were acting. I knew it the second they started yelling. The police are on their way, their partner said. They'll want your copy. I'll wait out here until they come, the neighbor said, just in case. His offer brought a bit of warmth to the moment. Not everyone would stand outside to help after seeing something like that. The spouse felt grateful, while the neighbor stepped aside to stand by the driveway. The spouse and their partner went back inside. The spouse leaned into their partner's side, feeling the tension ease just a little. A moment later, the spouse finally asked what had been on their minds since the confrontation. How did you stay so calm out there? Their partner looked at them gently. I've had training for situations like that, and staying calm helps the other person lose control of the lie they're trying to hold. But you didn't even look scared, the spouse said softly. I wasn't scared of them, their partner replied. I was only worried about you. Those words softened the spouse's chest in a way fear couldn't reach. They leaned into their partner more, letting that calmness settle inside them. A distant police siren finally echoed down the street. The spouse tensed for a moment, not because they feared the police, but because everything felt too real again. Their partner stood, helping the spouse to their feet. Let's talk to them together, they said. When the police car arrived, the neighbor waved them over and immediately showed them the recording. The officers took things seriously from the start. They asked clear questions, wrote down details, and didn't dismiss anything. When they saw the badges in the video close-up, one officer shook his head. These aren't real, he said. Not even close. He looked at the spouse with concern. I'm sorry this happened to you. You did the right thing, not letting them in. The spouse nodded a little. I didn't know what they wanted. We'll find out, the officer said. But they definitely weren't sent by the HOA. An impersonation like this is a serious offense. The spouse's partner stayed beside them, answering any extra questions and giving clear descriptions with steady confidence. The officers seemed to pick up on that calm presence and treated them with respect. After a while, the officers left, promising to increase patrol around the neighborhood and investigate the men's vehicle and appearance. When the police car drove away, the spouse finally felt the pressure in their chest start to loosen. Their partner placed a hand gently on the back of their neck, leaning in just enough that their foreheads touched. "You handled everything." With so much courage, their partner whispered, "I didn't feel brave," the spouse said quietly. "That's what courage is," their partner replied. "Doing what you need to do even when you're scared." The spouse felt their eyes sting a little, not from fear, but from the weight of the day finally settling. Their partner pulled them close, holding them in a long, grounding embrace, the kind where the world didn't feel so sharp anymore. The rest of the afternoon passed slowly. The spouse made tea to calm their nerves, and their partner sat close, staying within reach the whole time. Even when they weren't speaking, their presence made the house feel safe again. Later, as the sun dipped lower, the spouse looked toward the backyard through the kitchen window. Something about it made their heart thump again. "What do you think they wanted back there?" they asked quietly. Their partner followed their gaze. "I don't know yet," they said, "but I'm going to find out." The way they said it wasn't threatening. It was simply steady, sure, and protective. The spouse felt a wave of reassurance. Their partner placed a hand gently on the spouse's arm. "I'll check the yard tomorrow morning." "But what if they come back?" the spouse asked. "They won't," their partner said calmly. "And if they do, I'll be here." The spouse nodded, finally trusting that the worst part had passed for now. But deep inside, even in the comfort of their partner's steady presence, they both knew something important. Whatever those fake officers wanted, whatever brought them to this house in the first place, this wasn't the end of it. The next morning began with a strange mix of calm and tension. The couple woke up earlier than usual, the light barely touching the edges of the curtains. It was one of those mornings where the air felt heavy, like the world was waiting for something. Neither of them said it out loud, but both sensed that the day would bring answers. Good or bad, the fake HOA cops were already in custody, and the real authorities had spent half the night gathering statements, checking the fake badges and speaking with neighbors. Even with everything documented, the couple didn't know what would come next. People who pretended to be officials often had bigger plans behind them, and even though their act had collapsed, the reasons behind it were still unclear. The spouse was quiet while making tea, moving slowly, still a little stiff from the shock of the day before. The partner, the Navy SEAL, watched closely, not wanting to hover but unable to stop worrying. He had seen plenty in his life, but nothing hit harder than seeing someone he loved frightened or hurt. He knew the situation could have been worse, but that didn't make it easier. They sat at the kitchen table without rushing, letting the silence settle. Sometimes silence healed faster than words. After a few minutes, the spouse finally spoke. "Do you think they were after something? I mean, why would anyone pretend to be part of an HOA?" He didn't answer right away. He tapped the table gently, thinking, "People don't take risks like that unless they're after something. But we'll figure it out. And you're safe. That's what matters first." She nodded, sipping the warm tea, feeling her hands steady again. But they both knew that safety wasn't the final step they needed to understand what really happened. By mid-morning, an officer called and asked if they could come by the station. Nothing urgent, just more information, more questions, and a few developments that needed their attention. The couple got ready, not rushing, but not delaying either. On the drive over, the streets looked different, like the world had shifted a little overnight. People walked their dogs, cars passed by, kids waited for the school bus. But the couple felt like they were walking through a story they hadn't finished reading. When they reached the station, they were taken to a small, bright room. The officer they met before greeted them with a calm expression, not stiff or cold, but professional. He asked if they were comfortable, if they needed water, and then placed a folder on the table. The mood felt serious but not threatening. "We've confirmed the men weren't connected to any HOA or local group," he began. "We also found out the fake uniforms were ordered online, custom-made." The badges were copied from old county designs. Someone put effort into making them look real. The spouse felt a chill pass through her shoulders. The partner stayed steady, listening carefully. "We're also investigating whether they've tried this before," the officer added. "Your neighbors mentioned seeing them earlier in the week, watching houses. Not doing anything openly suspicious, but enough people recognized them from yesterday." The couple exchanged a look. The day before had seemed random, but now it looked more planned than they wanted to admit. "Did they say why they came to our house?" the spouse asked quietly. The officer hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "We think they were looking for easy access. Some people pretend to be inspectors or officials to get inside homes, maybe to steal information or valuables. But your spouse being home threw off their plan." He didn't mention the confrontation, probably out of respect. The spouse was grateful for that. The partner leaned forward, speaking firmly, but without anger. "What about their background? Did they have any history of doing things like this?" "We're still digging," the officer said. "We're also checking a property they were connected to. There may be more people involved." The room went quiet for a moment. It wasn't fear anymore, just the realization that the situation was bigger than two men faking authority before the couple left. The officer reassured them that patrol cars would pass through their street more often for the next few days. "We want you to feel safe," he said. They thanked him and walked back to the car. The day felt longer than it should have been, the sun already higher, time moving strangely. On the drive home, the spouse rested a hand on the partner's arm. "I'm okay," she said softly. "Really?" He nodded, though his jaw stayed tight. "You'll know. But I don't like the idea that they picked our house." "I know," she whispered, "but we handled it. And now the police are handling the rest." He kept his eyes on the road, but relief softened his expression. When they got home, neighbors quietly peeked out of their doors. Some waved. Others walked over to ask how they were doing. The couple didn't give too many details. They assured everyone that the police were handling things and there was no ongoing danger. People seemed calmer after hearing that. The afternoon settled into something warmer. A few neighbors stayed around longer, sharing small stories, trying to lighten the mood. Sometimes community wasn't about big gestures. Sometimes it was simply people showing up, listening, and reminding one another that they weren't alone. As the sun dipped lower, the couple went inside and closed the door gently behind them. The house felt like a safe place again, though maybe a little more fragile than before. They spent some time cleaning up the living room, putting things back where they belonged. The simple act helped quiet their minds. Later, they made dinner together. Nothing fancy, just something warm and familiar. The spouse cut vegetables while the partner stirred a pot on the stove. Moments like these, the ordinary ones, felt particularly meaningful now. After dinner, they sat on the couch, wrapped in a soft blanket. The partner finally broke the silence. "I keep thinking about what could have happened," he admitted. "It bothers me." She leaned against him. "I know, but I'm still here. And you handled everything. You didn't overreact. You didn't escalate anything. You did exactly what needed to be done." He nodded slowly, his breathing easing. "I just never want anything happening to you." She smiled, gently squeezing his hand. "And I never want anything happening to you either. But that's life. We face things, and we keep going." For a while they stayed quiet, listening to the soft hum of the house. It was calming, grounding. The events of the last couple of days felt like a storm that was finally passing. But even as they settled into the quiet, both knew that the story wasn't over yet. There were still unanswered questions. The fake HOA cops had spoken very little during their arrest, and the police still needed to uncover what group, if any, stood behind them. The couple didn't know what part 5 of their story would bring, but they knew one thing for sure. They were facing it together, and together was always their strongest place to stand. The next few days carried a strange mix of calm and uncertainty. The couple tried their best to return to normal life, but every small sound outside seemed louder. Every knock on the door caused both of them to pause for a second, and every unexpected car on the street made them glance out the window. They weren't scared, Exactly, just more alert than before. They were both trying to settle back into their routines, but some moments lingered in the back of their minds. The partner. The Navy SEAL kept telling himself that things were under control. He had faced bigger threats, more dangerous situations, and more unpredictable people. Yet this one felt personal, not because the fake HOA cops were especially dangerous on their own, but because they had stepped into the couple's home and shaken the sense of safety that was supposed to be normal. That kind of invasion wasn't something he brushed aside easily. The spouse, on the other hand, was calm on the outside but still startled when the doorbell rang, or when someone walked too close to the window. She kept busy, trying to focus on normal activities. She cleaned, organized, watered the plants outside, and sat on the porch when the weather was warm. She didn't like the idea of fear creeping into her daily life, so she fought it with routine and determination. One morning, a few days after their visit to the police station, they received a call. The officer they had spoken to earlier asked if they could come in again. He didn't sound stressed or urgent, just steady and clear. They agreed and drove over after breakfast. When they arrived, the officer met them in a different room this time. It was a bit bigger, with a long table and windows that let in soft light. He motioned for them to sit. "Thanks for coming in," he said. "We have updates, and some of it is good news." The spouse leaned forward, hopeful but cautious. The partner kept his focus straight on the officer, ready to absorb every detail. "We've completed more background checks on the two men," the officer continued. "They weren't working alone. They were following instructions from someone else, someone they only referred to as a coordinator. But here's the important part. This coordinator was arrested last night." The spouse let out a slow breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The partner stayed calm, but nodded slightly. The officer opened a folder and slid a piece of paper toward them. "We found equipment at the coordinator's house, fake shirts, almost identical outfits to what the men wore. They had a list of houses they were planning to target, and yours was one of them. But there's something else." He paused, giving them a moment to prepare. "We don't think robbery was the only goal. There was also a record of people who were often home alone during the day. You weren't the only ones they were trying to pressure or scare. They wanted easy victims. People who wouldn't push back." The spouse felt her stomach tighten. The thought of being singled out or watched made her skin crawl. But the partner reached over and lightly touched her arm, grounding her. "Did they say why they chose this area?" the partner asked. The officer nodded. "Yes, they said the neighborhood looked quiet and easy to observe. They thought no one would question them if they walked around wearing something that looked official. They didn't expect anyone here to have military training or to react strongly. They assumed people would just let them inside." The spouse shook her head slowly. "So they were planning this for a while?" "Most likely," the officer said. "But with the coordinator caught, the operation is done. There's no sign they had more people involved." The couple took a moment to process. It didn't erase what had happened, but knowing the bigger picture helped. Before they left, the officer offered one more reassurance. "You both handled the situation better than many people could have. And the fact that you didn't escalate things actually made it easier for us to charge them properly. So thank you for staying steady." They left the station with a fragile but growing sense of closure. The sun was bright outside, and for the first time in days. They didn't feel a heavy weight following them to the car. On the drive home, the spouse looked out the window and spoke softly. "I'm glad it's over. I don't want to think about these people anymore." The partner nodded. "I know, and you don't have to. It's done now. We can finally breathe." But even as he said that, he recognized something inside himself. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't tense. He simply felt protective in a calm, controlled way. The danger had passed, and now all he wanted was to help life return to normal. When they got back home, the neighborhood looked brighter. Kids were playing in driveways. Someone was mowing their lawn. And a group of neighbors gathered near a mailbox talking quietly. When they spotted the couple, they waved them over. "You heard the news?" one neighbor asked quickly. "The police said something about catching another guy." The spouse gave a small smile. "Yes, they caught the one giving orders." The neighbors seemed relieved. People started talking more freely. sharing small stories about seeing the fake HOA men walking around in the days before the incident. It was clear many had noticed something off but hadn't realized how serious it was. One neighbor said, "Good you two were alert. Some of us might have opened the door without thinking." The partner didn't say much, but his presence alone reassured people. After a while, the couple excused themselves and headed home. They wanted a quiet afternoon. Inside, the house felt different in a better way. It felt like they could breathe again. They spent the afternoon doing things they had been avoiding for days. The spouse baked something sweet, filling the house with a comforting smell. The partner stepped outside to fix a loose board on the fence. It was the kind of small job he normally wouldn't think much about. But today it felt good to do something simple. Later, they sat together on the porch. The weather was warm, the breeze gentle, and the sky painted a soft shade of orange as the sun lowered. The spouse looked at the partner and said, "You know, I keep thinking about how calm you were. Even with everything happening," he gave a small smile. "Calm is easier when the person you care about is right in front of you. That's what mattered." She sighed softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad we're okay, and I'm glad we had each other through it all." For a moment, they let the silence settle around them. People walking by waved. Life seemed normal again. The world didn't feel as sharp or heavy as it did a few days ago. As the evening grew darker, they moved back inside, turning on a single warm lamp in the living room. They sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket together. The partner gently brushed a strand of hair from the spouse's face. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "You handled everything. You stayed steady even when you were scared, and you didn't let them shake who you are." She looked up at him, her eyes soft. "Maybe, but I wouldn't have made it through without you." He shook his head lightly. "No, you're stronger than you think. I just happened to be there when you needed backup." She laughed gently, and the sound felt like the first true laugh of the week. The night moved slowly, comfortably. They talked about small things, the garden, the weather, plans they had set aside because of the incident. It felt good to shift focus back to normal life. Two gentle things, two peaceful thoughts, before going to bed. The spouse paused at the doorway and looked back into the living room, as if checking whether the house felt safe again. It did. Completely, the partner noticed, and walked over, wrapping an arm around her. "It's ours," he said quietly, "and nothing is taking that away." She leaned into him, the tension finally melting. That night they slept deeply. Not because everything was perfect, but because the fear had loosened its grip. The world felt steady again. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to its natural rhythm. The couple walked in the evenings, waved at neighbors, and enjoyed quiet mornings with warm drinks. The incident became something they talked about less and less. Not because it didn't matter, but because they didn't want it to define their days. One afternoon, the spouse sat on the porch reading a book, when a mail carrier walked up and handed over a small stack of letters. Among them was an envelope from the police department. Inside was a simple note thanking them for their cooperation and for staying calm during a situation that could have gone very differently. The note ended with a line saying the case was officially closed. When the partner came outside, she held up the envelope and said, "It's done. Really done." He sat next to her and took her hand. "Good. That's good." They watched the neighborhood for a moment, the birds hopping on the lawn, the wind brushing through the trees, the soft hum of a car in the distance. Everything felt peaceful. The spouse lifted her head slightly and said, "You know, I think we're stronger now," the partner answered without hesitation. "We always were. We just got reminded." She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. The moment felt warm, grounding, and full of quiet gratitude. They didn't need dramatic endings or big speeches. What they needed was exactly what they had: each other safety, and the comfort of knowing they had overcome something hard together. Life moved forward, as it always does. The couple continued building their days with small joys, steady routines, and gentle moments. The shadows of the past week faded slowly, replaced by brighter memories and a deeper sense of resilience. And though they would never forget what happened, they didn't let it linger in fear. Instead, they carried forward the reminder that no matter what came their way, fake threats, Unexpected danger, or anything life threw at them, they would always face it side by side. Together was their strongest place, and together was where they stayed.